The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is on a tough three-day trip to Russia and Ukraine as he faces accusations that he's not done enough to manage the crisis. The Foreign Minister of Russia has welcomed the Secretary-General to Moscow today. Russia says that they have expeditiously responded to Guterres' initiative to hold talks on Ukraine. Ahead of that closed-door meeting, Sergei Lavrov opened the talks with a note of appreciation for Antonio Guterres, adding that the multilateral principles of the United Nations have been flaunted by the West.
Уважаемый господин генеральный секретарь, коллеги, мы приветствуем вас в Москве.
Dear Your Excellency, dear Secretary-General, colleagues, we welcome you to Moscow wholeheartedly.
The multilateral have been flaunted by the West. That was there. The UN chief said he was extremely interested in finding common ground to end the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine and to help in the evacuation of civilians. He also added that all parties have different interpretations of what is happening in Ukraine. But the United Nations aims to work out the best way to minimize the suffering of ordinary people.
I know that we have today, in facing the complex situation in Ukraine, different interpretations about what's happening in Ukraine. But that does not limit the possibility to have a very serious dialogue on how best we can work to minimize the suffering of people. On the other hand, we are extremely interested in finding ways in order to create the conditions for effective dialogue, create the conditions for a ceasefire as soon as possible, create the conditions for a peaceful solution. And in this context, we are also interested in everything that can be done to minimize the impact in different parts of the world.
Now, Guterres is scheduled to meet Russia's President Vladimir Putin later today, and he'll then head to Kiev to meet Ukraine's leader Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday. Now, our correspondent William Denslow is joining us live on the broadcast from Riga in Latvia, of course, that country right on the border with Russia. Will, thanks very much for joining us. So tell us, how did this meeting between Lavrov and the UN Secretary-General go so far?
Well, Giles, this is a rather frosty reception as far as the Secretary-General was expecting. Of course, according to some analysts, attempts to previously meet with the top-ranking officials in the Kremlin by the Secretary-General have been rebuffed in previous weeks. And of course, what we've seen recently, over recent days really, in New York at the United Nations headquarters are efforts from the Secretary-General who, over the past few months, has really been seen as rather sidelined in this conflict, but he has been trying to ramp up efforts to try and get a humanitarian ceasefire in place. He's recently sent his UN aid chief Martin Griffiths to both Ukraine and Russia to try and get a kind of ceasefire implemented. That ultimately, though, has not yet been successful. So this is certainly seen as an attempt for the Secretary-General to try and ramp up those efforts. Of course, he's also drawn the ire of Kiev by choosing to visit Moscow before heading to Ukraine. Now, when he headed to Moscow, on his journey there, he was given really a direct message from officials in Ukraine. They said that he should come away with a key priority. That is to install a humanitarian corridor out of Mariupol, of course, that city in Ukraine that has faced severe bombardment over recent weeks. Giles?
Yeah, well, we saw the Russian Foreign Minister warning of the prospect of World War III. Tell us, what more did he have to say?
Giles, you're absolutely right. Some incredibly strong words there from Sergei Lavrov. Not only did he mention the risk of World War III, he said that the risk of nuclear weapons being used was being ratcheted up as well. He accused the West, really, of engaging in a proxy war with Russia and for arming that proxy, that proxy being Ukraine. Sergei Lavrov also said when it comes to World War III that he said this was a serious concern, it was a real concern, and it can't be understated. Of course, Russia in recent weeks has reiterated their warnings to NATO and Ukraine's allies about arming the country, reiterating that point again on Tuesday, saying that any kind of weapon shipments being sent into Ukraine will certainly be the subject of attack as far as Russia is concerned. This is a huge worry as far as NATO is concerned. Of course, they have reiterated that NATO troops will not be fighting directly with Russia. That is a key red line as far as NATO and Ukraine's allies are concerned. They have resisted so far to have a no-fly zone because of that, want to avoid that direct confrontation with Moscow as well. So while there are these red lines that NATO and Ukraine's allies have in place, certainly some very strong warnings from Moscow. We've heard from Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, who says that these latest comments from Sergei Lavrov are perhaps a message that Moscow is feeling a sense of defeat, and this is merely an attempt to try and scare Ukraine's partners from continuing to back Kiev. Giles?
Thanks very much for that update, Will. That's our correspondent William Denslow in the Latvian capital, Riga.